And it's just realizing that it's okay to fail sometimes, and products and projects are always ever changing. And it's okay for things to not go all right. That's what sparks innovation at the end of the day.
Welcome to the Food Grads Podcast, the podcast that takes you on a fascinating journey into the hearts and minds of the amazing people who work in the food, beverage, and agricultural industries. My name is Veronica, and I am a PhD candidate studying fat-based food emulsions. On this podcast, we share insights from professionals at all stages of their careers, find out what they do, why they do it, and how they are changing the food world one day at a time. So no matter what your passion is, there's always something for everyone in food, and we'll help you find it. Hello everyone, welcome back to the Food Grads Podcast. Veronica here, and in today's episode, we are covering what a product developer does, advice for students looking to go into product development, and how to pay mind to allergens when creating new products. But we'll also go deeper on how to embrace challenges to help you grow. Our guest today is Liana Yee, Junior Product Specialist at Export Packers Company Limited. Export Packers is an international importer, exporter, and distributor of food commodities. They operate 5 key business segments: international trading, domestic food service, retail, Asian, and fresh seafood. You may know them for their retail product lines of Diamond Harvest and Ocean Jewel. Liana is a graduate of the University of Guelph Food Science program and has had roles in quality control and quality assurance, and she is passionate about raising awareness around food allergens and supporting students as they transition into their new roles after graduation. Well, thank you so much, Liana, for taking time to come on the show. I am very fortunate to have met you during one of the University of Guelph's food science events that they'd put on, the Spill the Beans event, which I have to applaud the Food Science Club for putting on, getting so many professionals in the industry and, having a resource for students. But I'm happy that I met you, and I want to learn more about you because when I learned about where you work, first of all, I honestly had never heard of them. So I was like, okay, I'm curious about her. And here we are now. So thanks for coming on the show.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure. And I'm so glad I ran into you at the event as well. I've actually never attended one of those events at University of Guelph myself, so being there was a great experience, and I'm so glad I ran into you.
Well, I can imagine for you as well, like looking at foods, because a lot of the students were from the food science program and, the first year, second year and such. I bet that was so weird to be on the other side, I could imagine.
Yeah, definitely. It was like one of those moments where it's like the tables have turned, and now once I was in that position and I'm here, and it's like it almost gives you a sense of a little bit of imposter syndrome, like what am I doing here, sort of thing, or like am I qualified enough to be here with so many senior people, but like in terms of position and stuff. But honestly, it was a great experience, and being one of those students just put me in that position to answer questions that in answers in ways that I would want to hear it. So it was a great experience overall.
Well, they're lucky to have someone who's seen the other side and really truly understand the struggles in that. So I
Yeah.
guess in order to, maybe we should start to actually introduce how you're on the other side. Would you be able to tell me more about your current role at Export Packers and who they are?
Yeah, of course. So currently I am a junior product specialist at Export Packers. So Export Packers is an international importer, exporter, and distributor of a variety of different food commodities. So Export Packers were started back in like 1927 by the Rubenstein family. And it started as like a local family-owned retail operation. And it has grown massively to what it is now today. So at Export Packers, there are 2 main divisions of it. So we have the International Trading Division and we have the Domestic Protein Division. The trading division is basically a variety of different commodity groups. So everything is divided up based on what food commodity is sold by each team. And they trade this food commodity internationally, dealing with suppliers all over the world. So the different teams that we have, for example, are the team, fruits and vegetable team, the juice, grains, honey, and seafood. So meat mainly consists of pork, chicken, and beef. And this is one of our larger teams. So it's divided up based on the customer market. So, for example, we have North America, South America, Caribbean, Mexico, and Far East. So basically, all of their customers are in these parts of the world. And then we have our domestic protein division, and that's where I'm currently working in. And we mainly deal with seafood. So we are divided up into food service and retail, and we sell, we basically provide seafood to large retailers and restaurant chains within Canada. We do both private label and our own brands, which I'm not sure if you've heard any of them, but you might be familiar with Ocean Jewel, Family Delight, Ocean Dragon, and Diamond Harvest. As part of our domestic protein division, we also have our seafood manufacturing plant. This plant mainly does commodity seafood items in which they are either cooked or raw and further processed and then packed. The main types of packaging that we deal with at this plant are include matte packaging, so modified atmosphere packaging, vacuum packaging, and skin pack and bag. In terms of my own role, I mainly deal with the retail side of things and assisting product development on that side. So on this side, we mainly deal with value added fish items. So by value added, I mean anything that has been further processed, either if it's been marinated, smoked, breaded, or seasoned, anything in that space, I deal with in terms of product development. And we do private label for a variety of very large retailers in Canada. So, for example, like Walmart, Sobeys, Loblaws, these are we currently deal with. Yeah, so that's just like a sums up a little bit about the company and myself.
Wow, that's,
Hmm.
I am amazed at, I was honestly never aware of export packers prior, but hearing about it, it sounds like probably a lot of the seafood products that I have consumed without knowing it are probably related, are probably coming from you. So,
Yeah, most likely.
wow, I feel as though seafood is not something that gets talked about. Maybe it's the culturally being in Canada here, or at least this part of Canada, I should say, because definitely the East Coast is different. But working with seafood and such, that's such a unique area to be working in.
Yeah, definitely. Like you said, you don't hear a lot about it here, like in Ontario. It's more like the East Coast.
You work with the value added products of seafood and such. So that leads to, seafood is very different to many different people and how they want to eat it. So, but the first thing
Mhm.
that comes to my mind is just where do you get inspiration for when you're working on your products?
I think a lot of the inspiration comes from what is something like seafood itself. It, I guess you could say in the space of seafood, there's innovation wise, at least on the retail level, like you have a lot of breaded items and stuff along those lines. So the inspiration mainly would come from, I think, top trends right now that we see playing around with different flavors and spices, and also different shapes that we can manipulate the seafood into, is where I think a lot of our inspiration comes from into that. Also, what's trending and like the food service side of things too, and how that can be applied into the retail market.
Mm. That also gets me thinking about just because you mentioned commodities and such, and I think that I'm not going to dive too much into that, but I think the fact that that export packers is able to work from both retail to export, that's pretty amazing because I think that it's even I've been involved with the food industry for a while and such, but once it hits to a certain point, just the scale of how things are produced, it just blows my mind that you can start thinking about things in a commodity wise when you're on the day to day, they it's tangible and very in front of you that you couldn't even imagine that it gets traded internationally, like, that goes to another line of people, but you're just focusing on, creating good products and good quality.
Yeah. Sorry, I just wanted to clarify. So our trading division, those are the commodities that are traded internationally. So these mainly are like raw materials that then go to packaging facilities or food manufacturers to be further processed. And then for our domestic protein, so our seafood, that's just within Canada.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, sorry.
No, that's mine. Again, it's always, thinking a scale. Sometimes it can really get to me.
Yeah.
So tell me, like, how did you get into this role? Like, what was your career journey, and like, how did you get to this point?
Yeah, so I guess if we want to take it all the way back, we can talk about what first like sparked my love for food science, I guess. So growing up, I was always surrounded with food. Like I came from a Chinese and Trinidadian household. So I was always surrounded by so many different cuisines, and both my parents came from a restaurant background in terms of their parents owned restaurants. So cooking has always been like something near and dear to me. So when it came to high school, and I'm sure we all remember taking that careers class back in grade 10,
Yep.
I remember just like searching the internet for different careers that would involve food. But I told myself that I didn't really want to go into like culinary space and being a chef and everything. But I did love science. So I just kind of searched up like, is there a career that kind of meshes both of them? And long and behold, there was. So ever since that day, I've always wanted to go into food science, and I'm very lucky that since then and all throughout university and up until now, my mind has not changed on it. So after high school, I went to the University of Guelph in 2016 in there, and I was part of their undergraduate food science program. So during that time, I would say maybe around the summer going into second year of university, I found I got a job actually as a summer student lab technician at Saputo or Nielsen Milk,
Mm-hmm.
which is their milk plant in Georgetown. And so I spent my summers working there as a laboratory tech and mainly working on things such as like shelf life studies, day-to-day laboratory testing. And this was really cool for me because I wasn't in the co-op program. So this kind of acted as like co-op for me. And I learned a lot of like foundational micro and QA skills and knowledge from that role. And I'm forever grateful for that. And then once I graduated, so I actually ended up graduating just after the pandemic hit. So in 2020. So once I graduated, it took me quite a while to find a job. I was probably started looking for a job back in November of my second year of,
Wow.
sorry, November of my second semester of my fourth year. I'm sorry, second year would be a reach, but
I was gonna say that's pretty impressive.
no, no, no. But yeah, so I applied to definitely over like 50 jobs and I hadn't heard back any. I was offered a position at Saputo, but the hours just weren't the best for me at the time, just because I didn't drive and commuting at 2 a.m. is really difficult
Mm-hmm.
if you don't have your own car. So I unfortunately didn't take that position and I just continued looking for something possibly more in product development because that was where my passion lied, even though I had more QA background. So, yep, months went by, I didn't hear anything. And it wasn't until maybe August or just before that, like maybe July, where I heard back from Export Packers. And I had actually applied for a food safety coordinator position in their trading division. So that's actually where I started at Export Packers in 2020, was in their trading division. So I started as a food safety coordinator and I would oversee all of the regulatory and QA activities associated with the trading of all of these different commodities. And that was a great experience in itself. It gave me like a lot of great experience in terms of like communicating with both our suppliers and our customers and applying all of those skills that I learned at university about like HACCP programs and regulatory like CFIA regulations and also dealing with the US. I learned about FSMA regulations and I got certified in that as well. So after 2 years of being a food safety coordinator, I decided that I wanted to look at something more in PD. However, I'm sure some of us might know it's PD is a very competitive sector of food science to
Mm-hmm.
get into. So again, I did the whole applying for 50 plus jobs and I just because I didn't have that PD experience to start, I didn't hear back from anyone. But then I saw an opening for a senior PD position at Export Packers in the domestic protein. And I know like I wasn't qualified to be a senior PD, but I just kind of inquired and they were so interested in interview. And they actually ended up changing the position to junior and I was hired into that role and I started, I want to say end of September and beginning October. So I've been in that role for about 8 months now. Yeah, and that's where I am today.
That's amazing. That's so wonderful.
Yeah.
There's so many, first of all, thank you again for your honesty because I think,
Mm,
as those individuals who are maybe more into the career, they might start to forget when they first got their first role how many jobs that they're applying for. And I think for our listeners, I think that's a really good thing. Not that it happened to you per se, but the
mhm.
fact that you're just able to, show that it wasn't you had a job set up right out when you graduated. And also, I also commend you because I could imagine how stressful it was during the pandemic and you're trying to worry about the world at the same time of getting a job in your own life. So you have like these two competing things at the same time to worry about. But I really love how the path that you found as well. And I kind of can resonate a little bit with it. I did have a co-op program, but I did also work at a dairy company. And I
Oh,
did,
nice.
yeah, so I worked at butter and whipped cream factory.
Oh,
And then when I graduated, I decided I didn't have the itch, to be honest, to go into product development. I'm more of a chemist, so that wasn't where my eye
mhm.
was on, but I also did go into QA after I graduated. So I could imagine going into product development, although maybe others didn't see that as a benefit. I can see that being as a benefit to you because although you did QC, you've been in that manufacturing environment. So you've seen the manufacturing side of things, but then, bringing in your family as well, you've seen how the products are used with the restaurant side. And
Yeah.
then coming into the QA, now you start to know about regulatory, and these are all important things that play a role in product development. And I just love how you were able to, kind of make your own position. Like you were just inquiring, and I think that that's a really good. It's something I've told other students as well is that you don't, a lot of companies like prefer to hire within. There's a lot more trust that's built. They have a better idea, they can talk to your manager, how's she doing, how are they doing? But it's so wonderful that you're able to, get to that role that you wanted, but picked up a lot of things along the way. So it was more of a curvier path, but it seems like you're happy with where you are now.
Yeah, definitely. So I think a lot of people they kind of get blindsided about, oh, I want to go into this field and I only want to go into this field and what other opportunities I get, I'm not going to take it because it's not what I want, right? And I think a lot of people like they say, oh, QA, like for example, just any sort of job in the at a manufacturing plant, they might not see it as a step towards their final destination of maybe going into PD, for example. And I think, like you mentioned, all those little things like QA, regulatory, it all benefits PD in the end because PD is about understanding your overall product. And all those different steps contribute to that. And it all adds knowledge to it at the end of the day. So I think any exposure you can get within the food industry itself is a great stepping stone. And in the future, I think you'll thank yourself that you did that because now you have a different point of view on the product.
Has there ever been a time recently where you were working on your product and such, and you kind of
Mhm.
thought about something that came from your QA time that became useful now?
Oh, yeah, definitely. All the time. Because I actually do a lot of nutritional when it comes to like creating spec sheets, specification sheets for our products. We have to do like the NFT testing and well, we send that to be done by a third party lab and then we uh, have to create ingredient lists and the nutrition tables. And using my knowledge of when I was in QA of CFA regulations around those things and all the rules when creating those, it's very helpful.
That would make sense. And I know
Yeah,
that those labels are, you can't take them for granted. Like they are, it's easy to make your recipe, but then you get to the product label and you see everything together and you're like, oh, that's not as clean, or that's not
yeah,
the way we want to see it, or maybe that nutrition wasn't the way we wanted it to be.
right, exactly.
So having that QA experience and such, though, obviously you are enjoying your role now, but
Mhm.
what has been the things that, like, what has made you maybe say, I want to stay in PD? Because, it was possible that maybe you thought, oh, I wanted so much to do PD, but then you're thinking about it and thought, oh, maybe I want to go back to QA because that's what I really liked. So what's making you stay with your job right now? Like, what do you love about it?
That's a good question. I think one of the things that I love about, I would say, my specific job is that so because a lot of our suppliers are around the world and we have like co-manufacturers basically. We don't create any of our value added items in our plant. That means that we don't have ridiculous hours that maybe if you're working at a as a PD at a manufacturing plant, you would have to stay like for a plant trial, you'd have to get up really early in the morning, very late at night. My hours are actually 9 to 5 because I work at the head office. So I really enjoy that. It allows for balance in my life, like in terms of balancing my own personal life and then also my workplace life. So I enjoy that aspect of it. Another thing I think is like in PD itself is the balance between being at a desk and also being like in the test kitchen or running around to the plant and grabbing samples. Like personally, I cannot sit down at a desk for very long. I need to get up like every hour and walk around. I
Mm-hmm.
just can't do it. So that's one thing. Like when I was in QA, I would be at the desk all day. So because it was more of a regulatory role.
Mm-hmm.
So I do enjoy that it's like a nice balance of like we do have moments when we're at our desks because we're doing like admin stuff. And then we also have most of the time we're like in the test kitchen. So I enjoy that. Again, getting to work with food and apply like culinary to that because I love cooking and I love baking and all of that. So being able to apply those techniques as well is really enjoyable for me. And of course, the innovation side of things is what I love, and specifically using innovation to solve problems. That's one thing that I enjoy is like the problem solving aspect of it. As stressful as it may be, it's actually really thrilling when you're able to use different techniques to solve current problems.
Oh, that's so cool. And those are all amazing things because I have to agree. I don't think I could do a desk job. When I worked in QA myself,
Yeah.
it was a small plant, so I was fortunately at the desk and on the floor. I love doing both, but I could not imagine sitting at a desk all day.
Yeah.
But I have to point out more is so you mentioned innovation, and I think we're in a really exciting time with food right now. I think more than ever there's really a push for innovation. And I think that's so cool right now about that space. And you mentioned about problem solving as well. Do you mind me asking, like, how you approach problem solving, or how maybe you minimize stress, or yeah, let's just go with that. Let's go
Yeah,
with how do you approach problem solving in innovation when it's, innovating, it's new.
right, right. I think in terms of problem solving as a whole, whenever there's an issue arise, I feel like human instinct for most of us is to like panic. And I kind of, when there is a problem, my first instinct is to just kind of like, okay, let's not panic. Let's first of all take a step back and just separate, okay, this is what's happening. What what solutions can we look for this? Instead of panicking, like that doesn't help solve the solution. So it helps to kind of break things down, make it a little less overwhelming in the moment, and it helps come up with a solution a little quicker. Yeah.
Yes, I definitely have to agree with that. I will admit I did that today. I can somewhat feel where you're coming from, being in a PhD, being in a lab. We are trying to come up with solutions to why didn't this experiment go right? What could I do alternatively? And I'll admit that sometimes, like even today, did not work out at all. And the 5 things that I thought I would try, all 5 didn't work. So I had a bit of a panic where I was like, oh great, what's going to be next? And I think it's again nice that you're sharing these types of things, because it can be so easy to look at our mentors, our those above us, our seniors, even our colleagues, and they all look so cool and calm and collected, and you're like, I'm the only one here freaking out. But
Yeah.
I mean, obviously you're not, you've recognized it, and you take a step back, but I appreciate you being honest with that, because it's
Yeah.
something I'm trying to work at a little bit more too.
Yeah, definitely. I think, like you were saying, when you have so many different plans, right? And then all of them just they don't go the way that you think they were or you wanted them to. And it's just realizing that it's okay to fail sometimes, and products and projects are always ever changing. And it's okay for things to not go all right, right? Like that's what sparks innovation at the end of the day.
I like that. I like that a lot, that last little frame, because you're right, things are always moving. And just because you try harder doesn't mean it's actually going to work. Maybe it just fundamentally doesn't work. And that's not you failing. That's
Yeah.
just, it just doesn't work.
Exactly.
And this might be jumping, but it might be related to the innovation space. But I heard that you're very passionate about food allergies. And I don't know if that's something that you bring to your role, but would you be able to tell me why this is passionate to you, and maybe it does affect your work?
Yeah, of course. So, like you said, I have a great passion for food allergies. I mean, food allergens.
Sorry, that's my mistake.
No, no, no. So, this is mainly because I have a personal connection to it. So, growing up, I had a lot of food sensitivities. Even now, I have food sensitivity just because I have irritable bowel syndrome or IBS. So, there's a lot of different foods that can trigger that, and a lot of things that I have to stay away from. And one of those things being one of the biggest ones is dairy. And dairy is like everything, almost
Mm-hmm.
everything that tastes great, right?
Yes, unfortunately.
Yeah. So also going along with that, I have a younger brother and he has a lot of food allergies that are like life-threatening for him. So he's anaphylactic. So that includes to peanuts, tree nuts, dairy, and also egg whites when he was younger. He grew out of it now, but growing up, this was quite an issue for my mom in terms of finding things to feed us, right? Recipes and
Mm-hmm.
products. Just because back then, like 20 years ago, we didn't have as much in terms of innovation that we are so lucky to have now in terms of like our dairy free products, dairy alternatives. nut-free products and egg substitutes, all of that sort of stuff. Maybe we had some of it, but it just wasn't very great tasting and quite expensive for what it was. So because of that, my mom had to get creative and she had to come up with different alternatives. And I just saw like how much that kind of added to the pressures of like her normal day-to-day, life. And growing up, I told myself that once I got into the food industry, I would like to help find alternatives for people like that in that position so that they be able to enjoy the things that everyone else can. So that's kind of like what sparked that fire in. And in terms of applying that to my current job, so a lot of the things I guess that I deal with, most of the products that I deal with are breaded food items. Sorry, breaded seafood items. So things like breaded calamari, breaded fish, shrimp. So I think one of the biggest allergens when it comes to breaded foods is most likely gluten and wheat. So I'm not applying anything as of currently, but it definitely has got me thinking about finding ways in which we can incorporate batters that are gluten free in the products that we do.
Well, that makes sense why that would be so passionate. I feel as I'm sitting here, I'm realizing that I have not thought about the allergen piece in terms of the plant based alternatives, in terms of the dairy space. I've been very fortunate in my life to not have any allergies myself, nor anything really directly with my family. The closest I have is, I mean, it is an allergen, but my partner, his father is celiac, but he has it so managed and under control, like with how he cooks and all that, that he just never mentions it. So it's just, because he cooks for himself, I don't really think much of it. But coming from the allergen side, thank you for really making me think, because I wasn't thinking about the allergen piece, and you're right. Reflecting on it, I could only imagine how difficult it was for your mother dealing with more than just a nut allergy as well, but how much the space has grown and been more inclusive in terms of that is a really positive side that the food industry is going forward. So, wow.
Yeah, yeah. Like for example, one of my favorite dairy-free beverages right now is like oat milk. And thinking back to like 20 years ago, I don't think that was a thing, or at least not in the market.
You know, the only one I could think of that, definitely not oat, but the only alternative
Mhm.
that I could think of is almond milk, silk. I think that was the
Yeah,
only one I could think of.
yeah, or like soy milk. That's what
Yeah.
I pretty much like. We grew up on soy milk, and that's kind of controversial in itself, but
But again, I think that that points out that conversation is that today there's actually options. Before, you know, maybe if you just didn't like the taste, if you didn't like the taste of, let's say, almond milk, and you know you can't drink dairy, well, there wasn't really many other options for you, and maybe there was soy milk like you said. But again, the food industry is really booming right now in terms of innovation, different people bringing their own experiences. Like the space is becoming more inclusive, and even bringing individuals that are like you coming into your daily role, it really hones into that you're not going to be thinking of it from the allergen, pardon me, from just maybe the cost side or the functional side. Like you're going to come in thinking about those individuals who now can actually consume your product and enjoy it and don't have to worry, because allergens can be deadly. You know,
yeah,
it's not a matter of I don't like this item or I'm just going to avoid it because in some cases, you know, maybe someone just doesn't like that group or something, but there's different aspects of why someone might not choose to eat something. They might not choose to eat it because of cost. They might not choose to eat it because of, what's the word? You know, maybe their moral stance on certain things or religion based. But when it comes to something like allergies, it then becomes a safety risk. It's not even just a choice. You cannot have it. So
right.
living in a world that's more bringing more innovation, it's really great to see that. And I like
Mhm.
that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think just going back to applying that to my day to day, when, for example, my team and I were looking at when we're developing products, we do try to make sure that in the ingredient deck there we try to minimize the amount of allergens there are in terms of like ingredient labeling standpoint and stuff. So I guess that's one way that that's also shown.
Maybe this can move to a different area, but
Mhm.
has this posed any like challenges in terms of your work?
Yeah, I'd say like, well, I'm pretty new to the product development scene and just like maybe the working world in general. But I would say that some of the challenges I face are something that I kind of brought up a little earlier, but the idea that when you have a plan, sometimes it's not going to go the way, even though you do so much so that it does get a certain outcome. There's variables that we can't always control, and it's not always going to go the way that we plan it to be or would like it to go. And it's just kind of understanding that it's okay to fail. Like failure is a part of the process, and that it's okay for things to change. Like we said earlier, that's what kind of helps to drive innovation by looking up for solutions to new things. And I think although I do go with change, I still find it difficult in like accepting change and accepting failure. I think maybe it adds to the fact that I am, and I feel like when you're new in the working world and you're younger, you kind of feel like you have something to prove, or you want to prove yourself to everyone else that has been here and has a little more experience than you. And when you fail, it's kind of like, oh no, this makes me look even more amateur than I am, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm trying to understand that the only way in which we can learn and grow is to make mistakes. And mistakes should not be seen as a bad thing because at the end of the day, that's what learning from our mistakes is what helps us grow and what helps us to become better. So yeah, that's definitely something I'm working on accepting that.
I think that's a very, again, thank you for your honesty with that. And
Mhm.
I think it's a feeling that a lot of us do feel. And it's hard to admit because I've definitely felt that early in my career. And even now, you always you want to help the team. You want to be a part of it. You don't want to let anyone down. And you, you don't want to look like you're not supposed to be there. And I think school does play a large role in where these feelings come from. Hopefully in the future it does shift. If you fail a class, then you retake it again, and there's always this constant pressure of keeping it up, keeping it up, keeping that up. And I mean, of course, there's deadlines and there's budgets and things you do have to keep for mind in the working world, but it's it's nicer when in your early career, I think people are a little more accepting that you're not going to get it on your first try, and that's okay. And even later on in your career, because they probably see themselves new, maybe. I don't know. But
Yeah.
I think that it's good to hear, you're being open with that you're being more kind to yourself. And I think that's something
Mhm.
that we all could probably do a little bit more of.
Yeah, definitely. I think I'm so fortunate to work with a team that at the end of the day, it's not seen as like, oh, you failed, you as an individual, if a mistake is made, it's your fault. It's kind of like, no, it's okay. Like we're all in this together and mistakes happen. And now we just know that moving forward next time, we're gonna do this instead. So always looking on the positive side and having a team that supports you through all of that is also great.
And do you find as well, again, going to that learning aspect, I'm just trying to think of it being a little more tangible and such. If there is something that maybe didn't go wrong, how do you make sure that it's not forgotten or it's more used as a learning experience rather than an ill feeling?
Right. So just to clarify, like, do you have an example?
So let's just speak to what I did today, for example.
Mhm.
So I was testing an emulsifier, for example, with this emulsion, and I found out that the emulsifier didn't properly emulsify the water and the oil. So I that might be seen as a failure, for example. So something like that, if you had a project where your plan didn't go as well, rather than seeing it as a failure, like how do you take that information and apply it to the next project, so to say? So how do
Right,
you tangibly learn from your mistakes, I guess, so to say?
right. I think that's a good question. I guess maybe looking back, so looking on the situation, and I think a big thing to remember is that dwelling on the situation, the current situation at hand, and like overanalyzing it, it's not really going to do anything but kind of maybe frustrate you and drive you crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to things like that, I like to focus on kind of like, okay, what happened today that maybe I could do better moving forward. So I guess, for example, I can give you an example of something I did yesterday.
Okay.
So I had to send a sample to a customer, and this was the first time I've done this by myself in terms of setting up like a courier service and everything. And I was so focused on setting up the actual delivery of the product and making sure that I got everything like out in time, did the correct like process and everything, that I ended up forgetting half the samples.
Oh no.
So so I got to the customer like on time and everything, but it was missing half of the stuff. And luckily, this customer is not too far from our office. So instead of, saying, oh my goodness, like I totally forgot to do this in the moment, I just kind of said, okay, I will go drop it. And so I immediately got everything together and jumped in my car. So I guess looking back on that situation, I think one thing I could learn moving forward is to not to hyper focus and hyper like fixate on one certain task, and make sure that maybe creating a checklist next time to make sure that everything that was needed is there. Because you know what happened when you get stressed, you forget things. So
Mm-hmm.
having a list on hand could help, help you remember to put everything there that needs to be moving forward. I don't know if that kind of answered the question.
No, yes it did. Yes it did. I love providing the example and such. Checklists are great. Don't
Yeah.
deem them. They're not QAs. Food safety loves our checklists. I'll tell
Mm-hmm.
you that.
Yep.
But that's actually a process that I actually took into my daily life that I picked up from QA is doing the checklist. I actually have a checklist before I leave the house, and I have it right in front of the door so I don't forget,
Yep.
because I'll be so hyper fixated on getting to the place on time that I forgot to bring the stuff I actually need to be
Yeah.
there. So
Yeah.
I
I
love that.
also, yep, in my phone I have the good old reminders app with all my tasks, and I put them all for the day, and then it's just so satisfying to like tick them all off. Just makes it like, you
I feel you.
know.
Don't shun the tools. Tools
Yep.
there's no shame in needing a notebook to carry with you. There's no shame in
Mhm.
having a phone to write your checklist. They're tools and they can tremendously help you.
Exactly.
Well, we are coming down to the end of our show, and I think that we touched on a lot of things, but I want to make it very concise and such. I'm going to ask you two questions, and the first question I wanted to ask is, what advice would you give to a student who wants a career similar to yours?
So I would say maybe something that I touched on a little earlier, but don't be afraid to take opportunities that in the moment may seem like they don't add to your final goal, your final destination, but in the end, all of these opportunities act as a stepping stone that will only further your understanding and help you reach your final goal. So, for example, like if your goal is to get into PD, and for your first job you see something like it's in a food manufacturing facility, maybe not exactly PD, maybe it's something like an operator or like a QC technician. I would say still take that job because it gives you a different lens in helping you to understand the product when you finally get into P. And all of that adds to your skill set, your little, your toolbox that you're gonna bring with you into P. So don't overlook other positions that may not seem like they fit you at the time.
Well, I think that's great advice, and I'm going to leave it there. So, the last question I'm going to ask you before you go is where can people find you?
So I would say the best place to find me would be on LinkedIn, which is just you can search me by my name, which is just Liana Yee. Uh, and yeah, and it should be the one that says Junior Product Specialist at Export Packers.
Perfect. Well, I'll also make sure to link that in the show notes so people
Mm-hmm.
can find you easily. Thank you so much, Liana, for taking time to come on the show. I really appreciated your honesty. I can imagine hearing this episode, and this is one of those episodes that as a student I really would have needed to hear, because I think your place in your career is something that is the next immediate step for a lot of students. So that's the step that they're looking for, and hearing how honest you've been with so many things, and hearing that you have gotten to the side where you want to be, and it might have been a little longer,
Yeah.
but you're still there and you're growing. So thanks for coming on the show.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. And I hope, like you said, this gives a lot of insight to those that are newly going into the working world. And my story helps them to remember not to give up.
Thank you, everyone, so much for listening to episode 71 of the Food Grads Podcast. All the notes to this podcast can be found by clicking on the Student Grads tab on the Food Grads website. If you are listening to this podcast on Spotify, you can now directly interact with us. Spotify has introduced a new feature where you can respond to question and answers about each podcast episode. I have included it in all of our podcast episodes, so drop a hi if you're listening. And if you are on another podcast service, I'm sorry, they don't have that feature just yet, but that doesn't mean you can't reach us. Reach out to us on our socials, and hopefully Apple Podcasts rolls out this feature in the future. It's pretty fun, so looking forward to playing around with that a bit more. Liana was so enjoyable to talk to. One of the things that I strive to do on this podcast is to share voices from individuals at every stage of their career. I think it's important because although it is cool to hear about what a director of food safety does, sometimes you just want to hear about someone who's newer in their career, because their advice can be just as valuable. As people move further into their careers, they can forget about the struggles that they've experienced early on, and I love how Liana was able to navigate into the role that she actually wanted to do, changing majors and deciding to take on a different job. Then, like, those are very big decisions, especially when you're younger on. It can seem like the world. So it's really amazing that she did that, and she worked hard for it, and you can tell that she's really enjoying what she does now. She's used all of her experiences as learning opportunities, taking on transferable skills, transferable knowledge, and she was able to apply them, and it's been helping her along in her career now. So don't give up on your dreams, but be open to new opportunities, because you never know where they could take you. Well, that's it for this week's episode. Thank you, everyone, so much for listening, and I will see you next time.